Welcome to the Anglian Flaneurs. Today we're going to be walking around the waterfront of Ipswich, looking at its rich maritime history, looking at the docks, and we'll do this in two parts. So today it's part one. Suffolk is, as John Kirby points out in the first sentence of the Suffolk Traveller, 1784, a maritime county, and Ipswich is very much a maritime town. Its maritime history goes back to Roman times, when the Romans forded the river at the lowest possible point around today's Great Whip Street to Foundry Lane area. And from the early 7th century, the Anglo-Saxon rulers of East Anglia, wharves, formed the small settlements around the river to become a trading entrepot called Ipswich. This is a recent and very fitting memorial to those who served in the Merchant Navy. We're situated in an area around Neptune and Quay, in an area known as the Wet Dock, which in recent years is more widely known as Ipswich Waterfront, and here is a map of the area which might help. Wharf facilities were in operation in Ipswich on a bend in the Orwell from the 18th century, but were probably established a century earlier under the protection of wharves, previously mentioned, the ruling house of the Kingdom of Eastanglia. The original crossing was a ford east of Stoke Bridge linking Great Whip Street on the south bank with Foundation Street to the north, which then immediately branched into Lower Brook Street. However, there's always been talk of crossings over the River Orwell, and it's no different today. Plans to build 3 new bridge crosses across the River Orwell have been scrapped due to spiralling costs. This was the bad news of 2019. The plan was originally formed around the year 2015. And we can see an artist's impression of those crossings that were proposed. But the proposals for 2 smaller foot and cycle bridges remain, with funding from the local council. And they are shown at points B and C on this map. As we go through the vlog, I'll show you a number of ships, vessels and boats that are presently moored in Ipswich Dock. And this is a survey boat. I don't quite know what it is surveying, so apologies there. And we see one of Ipswich's best restaurants, the Aurora, on the waterfront here, though that of course is subject to personal opinion. We're moving in the direction now of Eagle Wharf and Gasworks Quay, and we can see a ship in front of us called the Suntus, I believe delivering timber, and it is German registered. In a few moments I will drop in some of its details for those who are interested in such things. We're looking at where the company Anglo-Norden is based, more about that later, but as we turn around we can see that there's a lot of cladding going on around the university's buildings, residential buildings and other private residential flats. So this seems to be a common problem in Ipswich at the moment, particularly on the waterfront, and I guess it's the reaction from the tragedy at Grenfell in 2017. I can't believe people are still living in these flats, so where they've moved into I don't know. It all looks rather unpleasant, but absolutely necessary. And of course our magnificent local MP, Tom Hunt, Conservative, has got involved. And if any of you watch the Buildings of Camden vlog, you'll get some idea of my political leanings. Anglo-Norden operates out of the port of Ipswich, operating its own terminal facilities, discharging regular shipments from their own chartered vessels. The company has storage in a purpose-built warehouse, which you've just seen on the quay, with full reloading and stock management services. And here we can see views of Ipswich Lock and entrance to the wet dock, which opened in 1837. And in 1997 the port was sold by Ipswich Ports Limited to Associated British Ports. And they operate both the West Bank Terminal to the south of the New Cut on the west bank of the Orwell, which we will feature in part 2 of the vlog, and Cliff Quay on the east bank of the Orwell, which we'll concentrate on today. Associated British Ports also operates the Ipswich Haven Marina, located in the wet dock, which has moorings for about 250 private boats, though it always looks as if there's a lot more than that in there. Certainly at the moment it does. I might be wrong on that fact, so if anybody is watching this vlog, please update me if you have better information than me. We're now in Ship Launch Road, so I guess the name of the road really gives away its history. As you can see, this is not the most salubrious part of Ipswich, but it has an incredible history and the spirit of its maritime past and present. We're now passing the sadly deceased Golden Ship Inn, which seems to become a haven for plant life, and a living example of how nature always reclaims. Dating from the 1860s, the pub was known as the Ship Launch until 2010, when it closed after several sets of managers tried to revitalise it. And it became a Chinese takeaway bearing its current name, the Golden Ship, which closed in 2018. And I've dropped in a picture from the archives of how it used to look. We're now moving away from the fashionable and trendy Ipswich waterfront with high-end flats, and we're moving to some really historic parts of Ipswich now, the Cliff Quay Brewery. The Cliff Brewery was actually started in 1723 in Harwich by Thomas Cobbold. His son Thomas Cobbold then relocated the brewery to Ipswich, where the water quality was much better from the springs of Holy Wells, and the original building stood above the quays of the River Orwell from 1746. This current building, completed in 1896, is a tower brewery by William Bradford. Nearby Cliff House was the home of John Cobbold and Elizabeth Cobbold before they moved to live at Holywells Park, Ipswich in 1814. It later became the Brewery Tap public house. Cobbold merged with local rival Tollymarsh Breweries in 1957 to form Toddy Cobbold. The brewery ceased operations in 2002 when the company merged with Ridley's Brewery in Essex. The success of the brewery and the importance of the Cobbold family in every aspect of Victorian Ipswich society and business, including banking, shipbuilding and the railways, pushed the growth of the town, and we also see a strong connection with Ipswich Town Football Club. The Cobbolds were a driving force in the creation of a railway that established a line from Ipswich to Colchester and London. And the railway helped expand the brewery's market inland and helped the port of Ipswich develop and grow, helping the town to thrive. I don't want people to think that the scenes here are a metaphor for the decline of Ipswich, though its manufacturing base, which was once really strong, not just with the brewery but with Ransoms, has diminished over years, but that's a story for all of British manufacturing, and now we see lots of different financial services companies and insurance companies in Ipswich, but again, that is really a metaphor for the rest of the United Kingdom. The name Patrick Cobbold cannot be underestimated in these parts. He was a legend of the town. He served as a director of the family brewery Toddy Cobbold and joined the board of Ipswich Town Football Club in 1964 and became the fifth member of his family to chair the club. And during his chairmanship of the club, Ipswich won the FA Cup in 1978 and the UEFA Cup 1981, as well as finishing Football League First Division runners-up on 2 occasions, and we've documented that again in previous vlogs. And we just showed you the famous Cobbold stand at Ipswich's iconic Portman Road in honour of the great services that the Cobbold family has given to Ipswich and its football club. We've just dropped in a picture of the brewery from the river in its more prosperous times, shall we say. The state of the building was not helped by a fire that broke out in February 2020, and arrests were made on suspicion of arson. I wanted to get into the actual port itself to do some filming. I thought you'd get some better images if I were to do that, but the security guard at the entrance refused me any access, and it's not really their fault. They're just doing their job, and they're probably really lowly paid as well. So that's something we can't do today, so you're going to get some views from outside the port. So maybe not the best pictures in the world, but it's the best I can do. I've dropped in some details about Cliff Quay, and it has 9 berths, and you can see them, or the names of them, on the screen in front of you. I won't go through all of them, of course. The port can handle vessels up to about 155 metres in length, with a maximum draft of 8.5 metres. And the main River Orwell navigation channel is regularly dredged to a charted depth of 5.6 metres below Admiralty chart data. We've now moved back to the wet dock, and in front of us we can see the iconic Orwell Lady. And its trips are well worth taking. I've been on a few myself, and it sails from Ipswich dock here and sails to the end of the Orwell at the port of Felixstowe, allowing for views of Shotley Harbour and the historic town of Harwich. They have special musical night trips, and bar and restaurant facilities are available. It's one day before Ipswich's start to the Championship season, with a game away at Sunderland, and by the time this video comes out you will know that Ipswich beat Sunderland 2-1. You can't make your way onto the waterfront of Ipswich without seeing or actually going to Isaac's. Isaac Lord was a local businessman who bought the property from the Cobbold brewing family in 1900. The building continued to be used for trading coal and corn until the 1980s. John Cobbold once lived in the Isaac Lord house. The complex of buildings that make up Isaac's on the Quay has a long history too, with its own story dating back from medieval times. Isaac's on the Quay is set in a collection of Grade 1 and Grade 2 listed buildings, including medieval and Tudor. Some of the oldest sections were constructed between 1430 and 1550. We're now moving slightly away from the waterfront and venturing onto one of Ipswich's most famous streets, Fore Street. In the 15th century this was the centre of the wool trade, and in the exports from the wool towns of Hadley, Kersey and Lavenham. And Fore Street has had many famous inhabitants. One, Thomas Eldred, was an English merchant and mariner, and notable for having sailed with Thomas Cavendish on the ship Desire during the second English circumnavigation of the globe between 1586 and 1588. Edith Maud Cook was born here at 90 Fore Street, and she was an early British parachutist, balloonist, aviator, recognised as Britain's first female pilot. And we have a map of how this area would have looked. You can see the waterfront, and you can just about make out 4th Street, and this is how the area would have looked in about 1550. But we're not finished with 4th Street yet. A very famous Dutch painter lived here between 1962 and 1982 called Quay. We're showing you the very famous 4th Street barges. Now this is a place where I've spent many hours of my life, mainly in the 1970s. And to show its age, the pool length is actually 25 yards and not 25 metres. There are no spectator facilities there, so galas tended to be a rather squashed and tight affair. The water level was actually quite low, well below the deck, and the lane ropes, shall we say, were rather antiquated, so swimming in there was like swimming in the sea really. The Ipswich Maritime Festival is on again on the 19th of August this year, so I would highly recommend, if you're near, that you come along. It's really a great occasion. Ipswich has a rich and brilliant history really, for want of a better expression, and my criticism is that many people don't recognise that, and the town as itself may not celebrate it as much as it should do, but maybe that's changing, and the Maritime Festival is going in the right direction. We'll come to the famous Custom House in Ipswich, often called the Old Custom House, which was designed by young local architect John Medland Clark. It was opened on the 24th of July 1845, having cost £4,250. The Grade 2 listed building is now the headquarters of Associated British Ports, and on the ground floor, a conference and exhibition centre. Storm Antonia has just hit, and the weather is getting worse and worse, so I'm going to call it a day in a minute. As I said, we are going to come back for part 2, so don't feel that I've only half done the story. Before I end this vlog, I want to tell you a little bit about the famous iconic Ipswich Thames spritsail barges. I've dropped in a few facts about the Victor, maybe too many facts, but these Thames spritsail barges are so iconic for this area, sailing up and down the east coast, maybe from the Thames in London, plying their trade. I can't think of many or too many images that are quite as iconic for Suffolk, nor for East Anglia, the Thames and the eastern counties as a spritsail barge. There are two other iconic Thames spritsail barges that operate out of Ipswich Dock, mainly on pleasure cruises, and they are the Hydrogen and Thistle. We really are pushing our luck now. You can see the water droplets on the lens of my camera, so the picture quality is really deteriorating, so I'm really going to call it a day now. And this is one of the wettest days I've known in Suffolk and Ipswich for a couple of years now. We don't get too much rain in this part of the country. It's normally known as the driest area in England and the UK, but today is an exception. I dropped in a picture just before we go again of the Custom House as it looked in the 19th century. And some other pictures of how the port of Ipswich would have looked in past times. Hope you enjoy them. And I wanted to mention the work of the Ipswich Maritime Trust, who do such a great job in keeping this history alive and really trying to bring it to people's consciousness. So finally, this is really it. I'm saying goodbye, and I'll come back soon for part 2, hopefully when the weather is much better.